Magnus, a billionaire, rediscovers love when he meets Ellen, a simple fast food cashier. What would happen if a lonely billionaire found happiness where he least expected? But fate put everything at risk. Can love truly overcome such great barriers? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Magnus stepped out of the towering glass building that housed his company, feeling the brisk Norwegian air wash over him. The late afternoon sun cast a glow on the city, illuminating the sleek cars parked in rows along the street and the bustling sidewalks filled with well-dressed professionals. Yet, despite the luxury surrounding him, a profound emptiness gnawed at his insides. He was a billionaire, a man of immense power and wealth, yet he felt utterly alone. His tailored suit, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, felt increasingly constricting, not only physically but metaphorically as well. He had just come from a high-profile business meeting, one of many that seemed to blend together in a haze of numbers and negotiations. The faces of his colleagues flickered in his mind, each one wearing a mask of ambition, each voice echoing with the same predictable corporate jargon. Magnus had long since mastered the art of smiling and nodding, of projecting confidence and authority, but inside, he felt like an imposter. He walked towards his car, a luxurious sedan waiting for him, but the prospect of returning to his opulent penthouse filled him with dread. The gilded cage he had constructed to shield himself from the world felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The silence of his home echoed the solitude that enveloped him. He had everything that one could desire: money, status, and possessions, but none of it filled the void that had taken root in his heart. As he settled into the leather seat of his car, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. The eyes staring back at him were weary, haunted by memories of a life once filled with passion and purpose. The laughter of friends, the thrill of adventure, and the warmth of love had been replaced by a relentless cycle of work and isolation. He knew he was missing something essential, but he could not quite grasp what it was. With a sigh, he instructed his driver to take him home, but as they navigated the city streets, Magnus felt an inexplicable pull towards a different direction. Perhaps a change of scenery would momentarily ease the gnawing emptiness. He instructed the driver to stop at a nearby fast food restaurant, a place he would typically overlook in his quest for finer dining. Yet, today, there was something oddly enticing about the idea of a simple meal in a casual setting. As he entered the restaurant, the scent of fried food and freshly baked bread enveloped him, a stark contrast to the sterile ambience of high-end establishments. The brightly colored decor and the cheerful chatter of patrons created an atmosphere that felt foreign yet welcoming. He stood in line, his mind still preoccupied with the weight of his responsibilities, when something unexpected caught his attention. Behind the counter, a young woman was taking orders with a radiant smile that lit up her face. Her name tag read Ellen, and her energy seemed to infuse the air around her with a sense of joy. For a moment, Magnus forgot about his troubles, captivated by her genuine enthusiasm. Her laughter echoed through the restaurant, a sound so pure and unguarded that it stirred something deep within him, something he had thought lost forever. When it was his turn to order, he found himself stumbling over his words, momentarily at a loss. The simplicity of the interaction felt refreshing, a far cry from the calculated exchanges he was accustomed to in the business world. He ordered a cheeseburger and fries, but as she handed him his meal, their eyes met for the briefest of moments. In that fleeting exchange, Magnus felt a flicker of connection, a spark that seemed to transcend the barriers of their vastly different lives. He took a seat by the window, his meal in front of him, but he hardly touched it. Instead, he watched Ellen as she moved effortlessly through her tasks, her laughter mingling with the sounds of sizzling grills and clinking trays. There was an innocence about her that was refreshing. She seemed blissfully unaware of the burdens that weighed on the shoulders of people like him, those who inhabited a world of privilege and expectation. As the minutes passed and he observed her, Magnus felt a warmth spread through him, a sensation he had not experienced in what felt like an eternity. It was as if her light was illuminating the dark corners of his heart, reminding him of the joy that life could bring. He noticed how she interacted with the customers, treating each one with kindness and respect, her smile unwavering even in the face of demanding patrons. The contrast between her carefree spirit and his own somber demeanor was stark, yet it intrigued him. After finishing his meal, Magnus lingered a little longer, reluctant to leave the warmth of the place and the glow of her presence. He watched as she chatted with her co-workers, her laughter infectious, a melody that played in harmony with the bustling restaurant. In that moment, he realized that he craved the simplicity of her world, a world where happiness wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by genuine connections and shared moments. Days turned into weeks, and Magnus found himself returning to the fast food restaurant with increasing frequency. Each visit was marked by the same anticipation, the same flutter of excitement that coursed through him as he approached the counter. Ellen greeted him each time with her radiant smile, her demeanor unchanging despite the monotony of her routine. He would order the same meal, and they would exchange pleasantries, small moments that felt monumental in their simplicity. With each interaction, Magnus felt himself unraveling the layers of his solitude. Ellen's laughter became a balm for his weary soul, and he found solace in her uncomplicated view of life. She spoke of her dreams, her aspirations, and the little joys that filled her days. Her perspective was a breath of fresh air, a reminder of the beauty that existed beyond the suffocating confines of his high-stakes existence. They shared brief conversations about their lives, and Magnus found himself opening up in ways he had never thought possible. He shared snippets of his childhood, his journey to wealth, and the sacrifices he had made along the way. Ellen listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity, her responses filled with genuine interest. In her presence, he felt seen, as if the walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling. He discovered that Ellen had dreams of traveling the world, of experiencing cultures beyond her own. Her enthusiasm was contagious, igniting a spark of adventure within him that he had long since extinguished. Magnus began to question the choices he had made, the path he had followed for so long. Could he escape the suffocating expectations of his world? Could he find a way to pursue happiness beyond the confines of wealth? As the sun dipped below the horizon on one of those evenings, casting a warm golden hue over the city, Magnus sat at the table by the window, watching Ellen as she moved about the restaurant. He marveled at how a simple fast food joint could become a haven for him, a place where he could momentarily forget the burdens of his life. In that moment, he realized that he was no longer just a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage. He was a man rediscovering the joy of living through the eyes of someone who had yet to be tainted by the harsh realities of the world. The days continued to blend into one another, and their friendship deepened. Magnus found himself looking forward to each visit, each moment shared with Ellen. They became a refuge for one another, a sanctuary from the chaos that surrounded them. Yet, lurking beneath the surface was an awareness that their worlds were bound to collide in ways they could not yet fathom. And as Magnus gazed out at the city that had once felt like a prison, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, Ellen was the key to unlocking a life filled with love and happiness, a life that had been waiting for him beyond the walls he had built. The air inside the small fast food restaurant buzzed with the familiar sounds of sizzling patties and the chatter of eager customers. Ellen stood behind the counter, her bright uniform contrasting with the muted tones of the establishment. The fluorescent lights above cast a warm glow on her face, illuminating her bright smile as she served meal after meal, completely immersed in her work. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the lunch rush had just begun to dwindle, providing a brief moment of respite. She wiped her brow and took a deep breath, her eyes drifting toward the window where the world outside continued its frenetic pace. In that moment of tranquility, she thought about her dreams. Dreams that felt distant yet so close, like the shimmering northern lights she had always wished to see up close. She had always longed to travel, to experience the world beyond her small town. The thought of studying abroad filled her with a sense of adventure, yet the realities of her life often grounded her dreams in practicality. A part of her felt selfish for wanting more, for wanting a life that extended beyond the confines of the restaurant where she spent most of her days. Meanwhile, Magnus sat in his luxurious office, the city skyline sprawling before him like a vast, glittering ocean. Despite the wealth that surrounded him, his heart felt heavy. He had just wrapped up another meeting, a gathering of influential minds discussing projects that would, in theory, change the world. Yet, as he gazed out at the bustling streets below, he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The laughter and camaraderie of his colleagues faded into a dull hum, leaving him feeling detached and alone. It was a stark reminder that success did not equate to happiness. His thoughts drifted back to Ellen, the fast food attendant who had unexpectedly pierced the veil of solitude that enveloped him. Her spirit was infectious, and her laughter resonated with a joy he hadn't felt in years. The way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her aspirations ignited something within him. A flicker of hope, perhaps. The contrast of their worlds fascinated him. She was vibrant and full of life, while he felt like a mere shadow of the man he used to be. He thought about their conversations, how easy it was to talk to her, how she found joy in the little things that he had long overlooked. As the days passed, Magnus found himself drawn to the restaurant like a moth to a flame. Each visit was a breath of fresh air, a welcome escape from the high-stakes world he inhabited. He would sit in a corner booth, watching Ellen as she interacted with customers, her laughter ringing like music in his ears. Her genuine nature was a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas he was used to dealing with in his own circle. He admired how she treated everyone with kindness, regardless of their status. It made him ponder the true meaning of success and fulfillment. With each shared moment, their connection deepened. Ellen would often talk about her dreams, of traveling to far-off places, of studying art and culture, of experiencing life outside the familiar landscape of Norway. Magnus would listen intently, captivated by the passion in her voice. He imagined what it would be like to walk alongside her, to explore the world through her eyes. She painted pictures of bustling markets, serene landscapes, and breathtaking architecture, and each vision drew him closer to her. The thought of her dreams stirred something within him, a desire to be part of that journey, to support her in any way he could. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, Magnus made a decision. He would invite Ellen to a charity gala he was hosting. It was an event designed to raise funds for a cause close to his heart, and he believed it would be an opportunity for her to see a different side of life, his world. The thought of introducing her to his social circle made his heart race. He was both excited and nervous, unsure of how she would fit into the glamorous yet superficial world he inhabited. Magnus spent the next few days planning the invitation, wanting it to be special, to reflect the genuine connection they had forged. He envisioned her in a beautiful dress, her joy illuminating the room as they danced among the elite. Yet, he also worried about the stark contrast that would inevitably arise between their worlds. Would she feel out of place among the well-dressed, polished guests? Would she see the difference in their lifestyles as a chasm too wide to bridge? Ellen's initial hesitation came from a place of self-doubt. The idea of attending such a high-profile event was both thrilling and terrifying. She had always been a girl from modest beginnings, and the thought of mingling with billionaires and philanthropists made her stomach flutter with anxiety. However, the excitement that mingled with her trepidation was undeniable. The opportunity to see the world Magnus inhabited, to experience a different aspect of life, was too tempting to pass up. She agreed to go, her heart racing at the prospect of stepping into a realm she had only glimpsed through the stories of others. As the day of the gala approached, Ellen spent hours in front of the mirror, trying on different outfits. She wanted to look her best, to feel confident in a world where she was bound to be surrounded by people who seemed so much more sophisticated than her. She opted for a simple yet elegant dress that hugged her figure, accentuating her natural beauty without overwhelming her. When she finally applied her makeup, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension swirl within her. On the night of the gala, as Ellen entered the grand venue, her breath caught in her throat. The opulence of the ballroom was overwhelming, with chandeliers sparkling overhead and elegantly dressed guests mingling in clusters. Magnus stood at the entrance, his eyes lighting up when he spotted her. He moved through the crowd, his heart racing as he approached her, ready to welcome her into his world. But as the evening progressed, Ellen's initial excitement began to wane. She felt the weight of the stairs directed her way, whispers trailing in her wake. The laughter and conversation that filled the air seemed foreign to her, a language she couldn't quite grasp. Magnus tried to ease her discomfort, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to his friends. Yet, with every polite smile and forced laugh, doubt crept into her mind. Did she truly belong here? Was she just a curiosity to them, a fleeting distraction from their lavish lives? The evening wore on, and Ellen struggled to shake the feelings of inadequacy that threatened to engulf her. She caught glimpses of Magnus across the room, engaged in animated conversations, his charm radiating as he effortlessly navigated the elite social scene. She admired him from afar, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. The glances exchanged among his friends, the whispers that echoed around her, only served to amplify her insecurities. Magnus, ever the attentive host, noticed Ellen's unease. He made it a point to stay close to her, offering reassuring smiles and gentle touches to remind her that she was not alone. But despite his efforts, the atmosphere felt heavy for her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was an outsider, a fish out of water swimming among sharks. The glamorous world around her, once so alluring, now felt like a cage, locking her away from the authenticity she cherished. As the night drew to a close, Ellen found herself retreating into her thoughts, the vibrant energy of the gala dimming in comparison to the warmth of her interactions with Magnus in the small restaurant. She longed for the simplicity of their conversations, the laughter shared over greasy fries, and the dreams they painted together. In that moment, she realized that love and happiness were not defined by wealth or status, but by the connections they fostered. As Magnus looked at Ellen, he felt a pang of disappointment. He had envisioned this evening as a beautiful melding of their worlds, a celebration of their burgeoning relationship. But now, as he watched her withdraw into herself, he feared that the night had only highlighted the differences that separated them. He could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty that had crept in as they navigated the glittering facade of high society. With the gala winding down, Magnus felt a sense of urgency to reassure Ellen, to bridge the gap that had formed between them. He wanted her to know that she was not just a passing fancy in his life, but someone he deeply cared for. As he approached her, ready to pull her into his embrace and whisper words of comfort, he couldn't shake the feeling that the night had changed something between them. The question lingered in the air. Could their love withstand the weight of societal expectations and the chasm that lay between their worlds? The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Magnus' penthouse, casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. He sat at the edge of his meticulously arranged dining table, a lavish spread of breakfast untouched before him. His mind was not on the golden eggs or the artisan bread, but rather on the enigmatic girl who had burst into his life like a breath of fresh air. Ellen had ignited something within him, a flicker of hope that had long been extinguished. Yet now, that flicker was shrouded in uncertainty. He sensed her distance, an invisible wall that seemed to rise between them after the gala. The memory of her hesitant smile mixed with the disapproving glances of his elite social circle gnawed at him. Magnus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his tousled hair. What had he done? He had invited her into a world that felt alien to her, a world that had once felt exhilarating but now seemed stifling. He understood her apprehension. The weight of his world bore down on him as well, and he had thought she would find beauty in it, not fear. In the following days, Magnus found himself wandering through the city, lost in thought. He passed his usual haunts, the luxury boutiques and high-end cafes, but none of it held the same allure. Instead, his heart yearned for the simplicity of the fast food joint where he had first encountered Ellen. The laughter, the carefree banter. It was a world where he could be himself, stripped of the persona he had built to withstand the pressures of wealth and expectation. Ellen had not returned to the restaurant since the gala. Magnus felt a pang of regret. He should have reached out more, should have shown her that there was more to him than the polished exterior. He recalled the way her eyes sparkled with ambition and her dreams of exploring the world. He had been captivated by her spirit, and now he felt a desperate need to rekindle that connection. He needed to understand what had changed, to bridge the gap that had opened between them. As he approached the fast food establishment, a familiar scent wafted through the air, a blend of fried food and the sweetness of milkshakes. It brought a rush of nostalgia, but also a twinge of anxiety. He pushed open the door, and the bell jingled merrily overhead, a stark contrast to the heaviness in his heart. The place was bustling with activity, a sharp reminder of Ellen's vibrant presence. He scanned the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but she was not there. Magnus took a seat at a booth in the corner, his mind racing. He watched the staff hustle behind the counter, flipping burgers and taking orders. It was a world so different from his own, yet it felt genuine. He remembered the carefree laughter, the way Ellen had made even the mundane seem magical. He had taken it for granted, and now he felt the void she left behind. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up, the door swung open, and there she was. Ellen entered, her hair slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed from the cold outside. She wore a simple uniform, and yet she radiated a warmth that drew him in. Magnus' heart raced, but he quickly noticed the way she paused at the entrance, glancing around as if debating whether to step further inside. He wanted to call out to her, to assure her that everything was fine, but the words caught in his throat. It was as if she were a ghost, haunting the edges of his life, and he was terrified of scaring her away. Instead, he observed her from afar, watching as she exchanged a few words with her coworkers, her smile bright yet distant. There was an undeniable shift in her demeanor. The carefree girl he had come to cherish seemed to be cloaked in a veil of uncertainty. Magnus felt a pang of guilt, realizing that he had inadvertently thrust her into a world where she felt inadequate. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant spirit he had fallen for. As she moved behind the counter, Magnus' resolve strengthened. He needed to confront her, to peel away the layers of doubt that had settled between them. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest as he walked toward the counter. Each step felt heavier than the last, but the determination to set things right propelled him forward. Ellen looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded caution. Magnus could see the flicker of emotion in her eyes, a mixture of joy and fear. He took a deep breath, searching for the right words to breach the chasm that had formed between them. But before he could speak, she turned her gaze away, focusing on the register as if it held the answers to their unspoken questions. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady, yet there was an underlying tremor that betrayed her composure. Magnus' heart sank. He could feel the distance between them, like a chasm that had opened wider with every passing moment. He took a step closer, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. His world had been filled with opulence and power, but here, in this moment, he felt stripped bare, vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. "I just wanted to talk," he finally managed to say, his voice low and earnest. Ellen hesitated, her gaze flickering to the bustling kitchen and back to him. Magnus could see the conflict in her expression, as if she were weighing the risk of inviting him into her life once more. He could sense her reluctance, the shadows of doubt swirling around her. He continued, speaking from the depths of his heart. He wanted to reassure her that he was not the man his world wanted him to be. He was simply Magnus, a man who had been profoundly touched by her light. The days without her had been filled with an ache he could not articulate, a sense of loss that gnawed at his insides. But as he spoke, he noticed her face hardening, a shield rising to protect her heart from the vulnerability of the moment. He could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing against them, and he knew they were at a precipice. Magnus wished for nothing more than to bridge the gap, to pull her back into the warmth of their connection, but the chasm seemed insurmountable. He watched as Ellen's shoulders slumped slightly, a physical manifestation of the emotional burden she carried. It was a moment of realization for him. This was not just about him and his feelings. This was about her struggles, her fears of inadequacy, and the societal pressures that loomed over their relationship. Magnus reached out, placing his hand on the counter, a silent plea for understanding. He wanted her to see that he was willing to fight for them, to embrace the differences that threatened to pull them apart. But as he searched her eyes for a sign of hope, all he found was a flicker of uncertainty. The tension in the air hung thick, a palpable force that neither could break. They stood on opposite sides of an invisible divide, both longing to reach out but unsure of how to navigate the complexities that lay before them. Magnus felt a sense of desperation, an urgency to break through the walls they had built around themselves. As the minutes dragged on, he realized that words alone might not be enough. He needed to show her that his feelings were genuine, that he was not just a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage, but a man who had found something rare and beautiful in her. In that moment, he resolved to do whatever it took to prove his love, to demonstrate that their connection was worth fighting for. But for now, the silence enveloped them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Magnus could only hope that soon, they would find the courage to confront the fears that separated them and embrace the love that still flickered between them like a fragile flame, yearning to ignite once more. In the heart of the bustling city, the air was thick with tension, a palpable unease that seemed to settle over Magnus like a heavy cloak. The once vibrant laughter that echoed in his mind was now overshadowed by the whispers and rumors that Lars had set in motion. Magnus stood in his lavish office, surrounded by the sleek decor that typified his success, yet the space felt suffocating. The panoramic view of the city, glittering with lights, no longer inspired him. Instead, it reminded him of the growing chasm between him and Ellen. He remembered the way Ellen had looked at him, her bright eyes filled with hope and laughter, a stark contrast to the shadows creeping into their lives. Since the gala, Ellen had slipped away, retreating into herself, convinced that she was nothing more than a fleeting distraction in Magnus' life. The thought gnawed at him, a relentless reminder of how quickly happiness could crumble under the weight of societal expectations and malicious intentions. Ellen was at work, the fast food restaurant buzzing with the usual crowd, but today, it felt different. She moved through the motions, flipping burgers and taking orders, but her heart wasn't in it. Each smile she forced felt like a betrayal to the joy she'd once felt when Magnus walked through the door. Now, the mere thought of him brought a bittersweet ache, a longing tinged with uncertainty. Magnus' world, filled with luxury and privilege, felt like an insurmountable barrier. She had convinced herself that she didn't belong in his life, that the whispers of Lars were more than just idle gossip. They were reflections of a truth she was too afraid to accept. As the lunch rush began to wane, Ellen found a moment of solitude in the back of the kitchen. The clatter of trays and the sizzling of oil faded into a dull hum, and she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Memories of Magnus flooded her mind. The way he listened intently, how his laughter made her feel as if the world was lighter. But those moments were becoming distant, overshadowed by the accusations that weighed heavily on her heart. She felt unworthy, as if she had been cast in a role that was never meant for her. Meanwhile, Magnus was determined. He could not let Lars's manipulations define the narrative between him and Ellen. He was aware of the rumors swirling, the attempts to paint Ellen in a negative light, and it enraged him. Lars had always been a thorn in his side, but this felt personal. This was about more than business. It was about the woman who had opened his heart and reminded him of the beauty and simplicity. He resolved to confront Lars, to stand up for what he believed in, and most importantly, to defend Ellen. The encounter with Lars was inevitable. Magnus found him at a high-profile networking event, the kind of gathering where the elite flaunted their successes and exchanged pleasantries that masked deeper rivalries. Lars, with his slicked-back hair and predatory smile, exuded confidence. Magnus approached him, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and determination. "Let's talk about Ellen," Magnus said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the superficial chatter that surrounded them. Lars raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence, but Magnus could see the glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He knew that Lars was reveling in the chaos he had created. Magnus pressed on, articulating how the rumors were not just damaging Ellen's reputation, but were also a deliberate attempt to drive a wedge between them. He demanded that Lars cease his campaign of lies, that he stop using Ellen as a pawn in their ongoing rivalry. But Lars was not easily deterred. He smirked, leaning back slightly as if relishing the confrontation. "You think you can protect her? You think she's worth the trouble?" She's just a distraction, Magnus. A pretty face in a world you don't belong in. The word struck Magnus like a physical blow, but he refused to show weakness. He knew Ellen was more than just a distraction. She was a beacon of light in his otherwise hollow existence. But despite his confidence, he felt the weight of doubt creeping back in. Later that evening, Magnus returned to his penthouse, the city lights twinkling like stars against the inky sky. His heart was heavy, and he sat in silence, staring out at the vast expanse before him. He couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that had settled over him. He had fought for Ellen, but the damage had been done. He was acutely aware of the void her absence had created in his life, a void that no amount of wealth could fill. Ellen, on the other hand, had made her decision. She couldn't bear the thought of being a burden to Magnus, of dragging him down into a world that was not meant for her. As she walked home that night, her heart ached with the realization that love, no matter how deep, could not conquer the barriers built by societal norms and personal insecurities. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not enough for him, that the whispers of doubt would forever linger like a shadow over their relationship. In the following days, the distance between them grew. Magnus tried to reach out, sending messages filled with encouragement and reminders of their connection. But Ellen's responses were short, clipped, as if she were trying to build a wall around her heart. Each reply felt like a stab to his soul, a confirmation of the chasm that had formed between them. One evening, Magnus decided to visit the restaurant again, hoping to see Ellen, to talk things through. As he approached the counter, he felt a familiar rush of emotions. The place was bustling with customers, but all he could focus on was Ellen, who was busy preparing orders with a forced smile plastered on her face. It broke his heart to see her like this, her warmth hidden behind a veil of pain. But when Ellen spotted him, her expression shifted. The light in her eyes dimmed, and he could sense her internal struggle. She was torn between the desire to run into his arms and the fear of what that might mean. Magnus stepped closer, his heart racing, ready to bridge the gap that had formed. But before he could reach her, she averted her gaze, focusing on the task at hand. Magnus' heart sank. He knew he had to fight for her, to show her that their love was worth the battle. But the thought of Lars's machinations loomed large in his mind. He had to be careful. He had to find a way to prove to Ellen, and to himself, that their love could withstand the onslaught of doubt and manipulation. As the night wore on, Magnus lingered, watching Ellen interact with customers, her laughter tinged with a hint of sadness. He wanted to call out to her, to tell her how much she meant to him, but the words lodged in his throat. He was determined, but he also felt the weight of uncertainty. Would she believe him? Would she see past the rumors and the barriers that had been constructed? Ellen caught his eye for a fleeting moment, and in that brief exchange, he saw a flicker of hope, a spark that reminded him of the connection they once shared. But it was quickly replaced by a look of resolve, as if she had made up her mind. Magnus could feel the ground shifting beneath him. He had to act, and soon. The longer he waited, the deeper the rift would grow, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing her to the darkness that Lars had sown. As he turned to leave the restaurant, his heart heavy with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved feelings, Magnus vowed to fight for Ellen, to prove that their love was stronger than any rumor or manipulation. The night was still young, and he knew he had to devise a plan, one that would show Ellen the truth of his heart. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to the storm brewing in his heart. He needed to reclaim what was theirs, to show Ellen that love could conquer all, if only he could find a way to convince her to believe in them once more. Magnus awoke with a renewed sense of purpose that morning, the soft light filtering through his luxurious curtains, casting a golden hue across his expansive bedroom. He stood at the window, gazing out at the bustling city below, a place filled with noise and life but devoid of warmth for him, at least until recently. Ellen's laughter echoed in his mind, a melody that had managed to penetrate the walls he had built around himself. Today, he would show her that he was more than just a billionaire. He was a man capable of love and vulnerability, a man who longed for genuine connection. After a quick breakfast, Magnus set out for the fast food restaurant where they had first met. The place was ordinary, a stark contrast to the lavish galas he often attended. But it was precisely that ordinariness that appealed to him. It reminded him of the simple pleasures in life, of moments spent with Ellen, who had opened his eyes to joy in the mundane. He envisioned the surprise he had meticulously planned: balloons, a small cake, and a heartfelt note expressing his feelings for her. It was time to put his plan into action. Arriving at the restaurant, Magnus' heart raced with a mix of excitement and apprehension. He stepped inside, the familiar scent of fries and burgers enveloping him, and his eyes immediately searched for Ellen. She was behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a playful ponytail, her face lighting up as she chatted with her coworkers. For a moment, he stood there, watching her, feeling as if he were witnessing a sunrise after a long night. The warmth radiating from her presence made him forget the icy loneliness that had enveloped him for so long. He walked up to the counter, trying to gauge her reaction without drawing the attention of others. Ellen glanced up, her smile faltering for just a moment as she registered his presence. Magnus could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by a hint of wariness. He felt a pang in his chest, the remnants of their last encounter still fresh in both their minds. But today was different. Today, he would set things right. Magnus had arranged for the restaurant to close early, allowing him to create a special moment just for them. As he prepared to reveal his surprise, a storm of emotions churned within him: anticipation, fear, hope. He wanted her to see him as he truly was, to understand that he was willing to step away from his world of wealth to embrace hers. He envisioned a future filled with laughter, love, and shared dreams, a stark contrast to the loneliness that had characterized his life for far too long. As the staff began to gather the last of their things, he felt a rush of nerves. Ellen was still busy, her focus on the tasks at hand, and he needed her attention. Finally, he approached her again, this time with more determination. He gently touched her arm, and she turned to him, her eyes wide with curiosity. With a gesture, he signaled for her to step outside, where he had set up the surprise. However, just as he was about to lead her out, the door swung open with a loud bang, and in walked Lars, the very man who had been a thorn in his side since the moment he had learned of Ellen. Magnus felt a chill wash over him as Lars entered. A smug smile plastered across his face. He was dressed impeccably, embodying the image of a businessman who thrived on manipulation and deceit. Magnus' heart sank as he realized that Lars had likely come to spoil his plans. Lars wasted no time, striding directly toward Magnus with an air of arrogance. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant, including Ellen. Magnus felt a wave of dread sweep over him. He had prepared for this moment, but not like this. Lars's presence loomed large, a dark cloud overshadowing the bright plans Magnus had envisioned. "What a surprise to see you here, Magnus," Lars called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you're not trying to pull another one of your grand gestures. We all know how those end up." His words hung in the air, laden with implications that sent a shiver down Magnus' spine. Ellen, caught in the crossfire, glanced between the two men, confusion etched across her features. Magnus could see the flicker of apprehension in her eyes, and it twisted his stomach into knots. He had wanted to show her that he was different, that he was sincere. But here was Lars, ready to twist the narrative to his advantage. Without missing a beat, Lars continued, weaving a tale of deceit that painted Magnus as a manipulative billionaire who used his wealth to toy with the lives of others. He spoke about how Magnus preyed on vulnerable people, including Ellen, and suggested that his intentions were nothing more than a game. The words were like daggers, each one striking deeper than the last, and Magnus could see the impact of Lars's words on Ellen's face. Magnus' heart raced as he watched Ellen's expression shift from confusion to hurt. She took a step back, her eyes widening as realization dawned on her. The very foundation of trust they had been building was being shaken by Lars's insidious whispers. Magnus felt helpless as he witnessed the betrayal forming in her gaze, the very betrayal he had been trying to protect her from. In that moment, Magnus realized the true depth of Lars's treachery. This was more than a simple confrontation. It was an orchestrated attack meant to destroy everything he had worked to build with Ellen. As Magnus opened his mouth to defend himself, To clarify the truth, he found himself at a loss for words. Lars's narrative was too compelling, too insidious, and Ellen was slipping away from him. Ellen turned away from Magnus, her expression a mixture of hurt and disbelief. She moved to the side, attempting to process the barrage of information and emotions. Magnus felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath him. The sweet surprise he had planned was dissolving into chaos, and he was powerless to stop it. In the confusion, Magnus' resolve hardened. He could not allow Lars to win, nor could he let Ellen walk away believing the lies that had been spun. He needed to confront both his feelings and the reality of the situation. As Ellen stood there, wrestling with the turmoil within her, Magnus could only hope that she would eventually see through Lars's deceit. But for now, all he could do was watch as the chance for their happiness slipped through his fingers. Ellen stepped out of the restaurant, her shoulders slumped, and Magnus felt a hollow ache in his chest. He knew she was leaving, not just the restaurant, but perhaps the city altogether, taking with her the light she had brought into his life. As her figure receded into the distance, he felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over him. The world around him seemed to blur, the vibrant colors dulled by the weight of his heartbreak. In that moment, Magnus understood that he could no longer remain passive. He had to fight for Ellen, to show her that the love they had was worth the struggle, worth facing the darkness that had threatened to engulf them. But first, he had to confront Lars, to unearth the truth of the man who had sought to tear them apart. Only then could he hope to win back the heart of the woman who had reignited his belief in love and happiness. In the aftermath of Ellen's departure, Magnus found himself engulfed in a haze of regret and determination. Days passed like a fever dream, each moment marked by the gnawing realization that he had let something precious slip through his fingers. As he sat alone in his sprawling penthouse, the city's lights twinkling below like distant stars, an idea began to take shape in his mind. He needed to confront Lars, the man whose machinations had driven a wedge between him and Ellen. There was no more room for complacency. It was time to unveil the truth. Magnus spent hours poring over documents and records, combing through connections and whispers that could lead him to the evidence he desperately sought. It wasn't merely about defending Ellen. It was about dismantling the fragile web of lies that Lars had spun around them both. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became that Lars had been playing a dangerous game, one that sought to exploit Magnus' vulnerabilities and manipulate Ellen's insecurities. The realization fueled Magnus' resolve. He would not allow Lars to ruin the one thing that had brought joy back into his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Magnus found the information he needed. A series of incriminating emails, detailing Lars's attempts to undermine Magnus' reputation while simultaneously discrediting Ellen, lay before him. Each word ignited a fire within him, a fierce determination to confront Lars and expose his true nature. Magnus could almost hear Ellen's laughter in his mind, a sound that had become a soothing balm to his soul, and he knew he had to act swiftly to win her back. The confrontation with Lars took place in the opulent conference room of Magnus' company, a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. The room, usually a haven of productivity and collaboration, felt charged with an electric tension as Magnus faced Lars across the polished oak table. The walls, adorned with accolades and achievements, bore witness to the battle of wills about to unfold. Lars, ever the picture of confidence, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips as if he relished the confrontation. Magnus wasted no time, placing the evidence of Lars's treachery on the table between them like a gauntlet thrown down. The emails, printed and highlighted, served as a tangible reminder of the betrayal that had threatened to tear apart everything Magnus held dear. As Lars scanned the pages, his expression shifted from amusement to incredulity. The facade of control he had maintained began to crumble, revealing the desperation lurking beneath. "You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built?" Lars's voice dripped with disdain, but Magnus remained unyielding. He had long since shed the weight of doubt that had once held him back. This was about more than just business. It was about love, the kind of love that transcended societal expectations and embraced the messy, beautiful complexities of life. Magnus spoke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, each word resonating with the truth he had uncovered. He outlined Lars's schemes, detailing how each calculated maneuver had been designed to drive a wedge between him and Ellen. The tension in the room thickened as Lars attempted to deflect, weaving a narrative of manipulation and deceit that only further exposed his cowardice. But Magnus stood firm, and in that moment, he became not just a businessman but a protector of the love he had nearly lost. As the confrontation reached its climax, Magnus' voice rose above the din of self-justification that Lars spewed forth. He proclaimed his love for Ellen, declaring that nothing would keep him from her. Not the whispers of the elite, not the fears that had once clouded his judgment. The power of his words echoed in the room, reverberating against the walls and settling into the hearts of those who would later hear of the confrontation. Lars, cornered and exposed, could do little more than sputter in frustration, the mask of control slipping away to reveal the petty jealousy that had driven his actions. With the truth laid bare, the fallout was swift. Lars's reputation, once a formidable force in the business world, began to unravel before the eyes of their peers. Magnus had armed himself with the truth, and as whispers of Lars's deceit spread through the company, it became clear that the tides had turned. The very people who had once feared Lars now regarded him with disdain, their loyalties shifting in response to the undeniable evidence Magnus had presented. With Lars's disgrace echoing in the halls of power, Magnus wasted no time. He raced through the bustling streets of the city, his heart pounding in rhythm with his footsteps. Each stride was fueled by a single thought. He needed to find Ellen before she left. The thought of her departing, of her dreams taking her far away without him, was unbearable. He had to make her understand that their love was worth fighting for, that he was willing to bridge the vast chasm that had once seemed insurmountable. As he approached the fast food restaurant where they had first met, the familiar neon lights flickered in the evening gloom, a beacon of hope illuminating his path. The aroma of fried food wafted through the air, but Magnus was oblivious to the distractions around him. His focus was singular. He pushed through the door, the bell chiming above him, and his eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. Ellen was there, her back turned to him as she served a customer. The sight of her, so vibrant and full of life, reignited every feeling he had for her. The joy, the laughter, the warmth that had felt so elusive during their time apart. Magnus felt a swell of emotion rise within him, a mixture of relief and urgency. He had to reach her, to bridge the gap that had opened between them. As she turned, their eyes met, and Magnus saw the flicker of recognition in her gaze. There was a moment of stillness, a heartbeat suspended in time, before he approached her. He could see the uncertainty etched on her features, the questions swirling in her mind. But he had come prepared, armed with the truth and a heart full of determination. In that crowded restaurant, with the noise of patrons fading into the background, Magnus poured out his heart. He confessed his love for her, the depth of his feelings that had only grown stronger during their time apart. He spoke of the revelations he had uncovered, of how he had fought to protect her and their love from the shadows that threatened to consume them. Each word was a thread, weaving a tapestry of sincerity and hope, binding them together once more. Ellen's expression softened as she listened, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. The resolve that had once kept her at a distance began to fade, replaced by the warmth of understanding and love. She stepped closer, her heart echoing his, and in that moment, they both recognized the truth. Love transcends social barriers, differences, and insecurities. It is a force that binds souls together, capable of weathering any storm. As Ellen embraced him, the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them in that sacred moment. They stood together, hand in hand, ready to embark on a new journey. A journey defined not by the expectations of society, but by their shared dreams and aspirations. Together, they would build a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future untainted by the shadows of the past. The city, once a backdrop of loneliness for Magnus, transformed into a canvas of possibility, painted with the vibrant colors of their newfound love.